$118,432. Not your salary. The number sitting in your checking account the night you realized you had nobody left to call. At 24, you and Marcus split a 2-bedroom apartment in Dallas with stained carpet and an air conditioner that rattled like it was dying every summer. You made $52,000 a year doing back-end support for a logistics company. Marcus made $49,000 selling roofing contracts. Every Friday night meant cheap tequila, NBA highlights on a cracked TV, and somebody saying, "Bro, when we finally make it." Back then, money felt communal. If Marcus overdrafted, you covered dinner. If your tire blew out, Ellis sent you $80 without asking questions. Nobody kept score because nobody had anything worth protecting. That phase of life feels poor when you're inside it. Later, it feels sacred. You don't realize it while it's happening, but shared struggle is one of the strongest forms of emotional glue humans have. Not happiness. Not loyalty. Struggle. The problem starts when only one person escapes it. Not dramatically. Quietly. First your income hits $84,000. Then $117,000. Then one random Tuesday in October, your annual bonus lands and suddenly your checking account has more money in it than your father ever kept at one time in his entire life. You stare at the number for almost 6 minutes. Not excited. Just disoriented. Because nobody prepared you for the psychological split that happens when your environment still remembers the old version of you, but your financial reality no longer does. That's when the friendships begin to bend. Not break. Bend. Money changes timing before it changes people. That's the first rule. At 26, you stop saying yes to everything. Marcus still wants Thursdays at the sports bar until 1:30 a.m. because he has work at 10 anyway. But now you wake up at 5:45 to manage a client team in Singapore before the US market opens. You start calculating energy differently. Not because you became arrogant. Because exhaustion became expensive. That's the strange thing about moving upward financially. Your life stops revolving around hours and starts revolving around cognitive bandwidth. You notice it the first time you leave dinner early. Marcus laughs. "Damn bro, corporate got you." Everyone laughs. You laugh too. But something small changes after that. Tiny. Almost invisible. Because the old version of you would have stayed. The new version protects tomorrow morning. People notice those tiny decisions long before they notice your money. That's what actually creates distance first. Not wealth. Priorities. At 27, you move into a high-rise apartment in Austin. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Concrete countertops. A gym nobody uses after February. Rent, $3,840 a month. Your mother sees the apartment and says one sentence quietly while looking around the kitchen. "This costs more than our old house payment." You pretend not to hear it. But later that night you sit at the kitchen island eating salmon from Whole Foods directly out of the container and realize something uncomfortable. Your life no longer makes sense to the people who raised you. That feeling spreads everywhere. Marcus still talks about splitting appetizers. You now think in terms of quarterly taxes. Ellis is stressed about a $410 car payment. You spent $2,700 on a last-minute flight to London because your boss wanted you there Monday morning. Nobody says it directly, but the emotional math changes. Your wins stop feeling relatable. And people can only emotionally participate in realities they understand. That's the beginning of isolation. Not because your friends are bad people. Because humans naturally bond through mirrored experiences. And your experiences stopped matching theirs. There's always a moment. A real one. Usually late at night. Usually alone. For you, it happens at 12:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. You open your laptop after getting home from a company dinner where a venture capitalist casually spent $11,800 on wine like it was parking money. You sit there in silence. Then you open the spreadsheet, checking account, brokerage account, 401k, restricted stock units, emergency fund, crypto wallet you forgot existed, total net worth, $312,447. You stare at it. Not proud. Not even happy. Just aware. Because the number confirms something your brain has been resisting for months. You crossed into a different life. And crossing into a different life comes with grief nobody talks about. You can still visit old friends. You can still laugh with them. But psychologically, you no longer live in the same world. That realization hurts more than people admit. People forgive failure faster than they forgive visible success. That's the second rule. When you were broke, everyone understood you. Struggle is socially acceptable. Growth is harder. Especially sustained growth. At first your friends celebrate it. The promotion. The new apartment. The nicer watch. Then the comparison starts quietly. Marcus jokes that you've gone corporate. Ellis asks if you're too rich for Buffalo Wild Wings now. Priya says, must be nice. After you mention taking 3 weeks off in Italy. None of it sounds aggressive. That's why it works. Resentment rarely arrives screaming. It arrives disguised as humor. And if you've known people long enough, they know exactly how to cut you without technically saying anything wrong. The worst part is you begin censoring your own life. You stop mentioning bonuses. You stop talking about investments. You stop sharing goals. Not because you want privacy. Because you want connection. But eventually you notice something painful. The more your life expands, the smaller you have to make yourself to keep old dynamics comfortable. That becomes exhausting. At 29, you attend a private dinner in Manhattan. A founder sells his cybersecurity company for $94 million and talks about it while eating sea bass like he's discussing weather. Another guy casually explains how he borrowed against assets to avoid taxable income. You sit there mostly quiet, listening, observing, realizing wealthy people aren't emotionally reacting to money the way normal people do. That changes you too. Not instantly. Gradually. You stop seeing $400 dinners as insane. You stop panicking over market dips. You stop thinking a luxury hotel is crazy expensive if it saves you stress. And once your internal calibration changes, it never fully resets. That's why going backwards emotionally becomes almost impossible. You can pretend. You can visit. But your nervous system already adapted to a new standard of living. Most people underestimate how permanent that psychological shift becomes. Every financial level costs a version of your identity. That's the third rule. At $40,000 a year, you sacrifice comfort. At $90,000, you sacrifice time. At $250,000, you often sacrifice simplicity. At real wealth, you start sacrificing transparency. Because now everybody sees you differently. Family asks stranger questions. Friends hint at favors. People suddenly remember old dreams they want help funding. One cousin calls you after 8 years because he has a business opportunity. A friend asks if you can co-sign something. Someone else says, "Bro, you're good for it." That sentence changes everything. Because the moment people think your money is communal, relationships become negotiations. You start wondering whether generosity creates connection or dependency. You begin questioning motives. You hate yourself for questioning motives. But wealth changes risk calculation. Not just financially, emotionally. Nobody tells you the loneliest financial milestone isn't your first million. It's the moment you realize you can no longer fully relate to the people who knew you before money changed your trajectory. That's the quietest part. You're sitting at dinner listening to conversations about office gossip, rent increases, and surviving until Friday while your brain is thinking about asset allocation, tax exposure, and whether you should exercise stock options before year end. You physically exist in the same room. Mentally, you don't. And the distance becomes impossible to ignore once you notice it. So you start splitting yourself into versions. One version for old friends. One version for work. One version for wealthy rooms. One version alone. That fragmentation exhausts people more than hard work ever does. When people imagine wealth, they imagine freedom. And technically, they're right. Money absolutely removes forms of suffering. The panic of overdraft fees. The humiliation of declined cards. The stress of choosing which bill survives another week. Money solves those problems brutally fast. But it introduces emotional problems nobody markets. Like wondering whether people still see you clearly. Like realizing achievement quietly destroys certain shared realities. Like understanding that some friendships were built less on love and more on synchronized circumstances. That truth hurts because it sounds cynical. But it isn't cynical. It's structural. Most friendships are proximity plus shared reality plus timing. Change one aggressively enough, and the relationship strains automatically. Not because either person failed morally. Because humans anchor relationships around identity consistency. And you changed identities. Multiple times. Around 31, something happens that scares you. You stop reaching out first. Not intentionally. You just get tired. Tired of translating your life. Tired of minimizing yourself. Tired of pretending your priorities stayed the same. Then months pass. You notice nobody called either. That realization sits heavy. Because it forces you to confront a brutal possibility. Some relationships survive mostly through maintenance, not depth. And once the maintenance disappears, so does the friendship. You sit in your apartment one night looking out over a city that would have impressed your 22-year-old self beyond belief. Custom suit hanging near the doorway. Rolex on the counter. Soft jazz playing from speakers you once thought only rich people bought. And the silence feels enormous. Not tragic. Just enormous. Because wealth often gives you space before it gives you peace. Eventually you stop trying to recreate the past. That's the final shift. You understand Marcus wasn't wrong for staying who he was. And you weren't wrong for changing. People grow around different pressures. Different ambitions. Different exposures. Some people optimize for familiarity. Others optimize for expansion. Usually, those paths separate eventually. The painful part is accepting that love alone is not always enough to preserve alignment. So you stop forcing old chemistry to survive new realities. You appreciate people for the season they belong to. You stop measuring friendship by duration. You start measuring it by honesty. Who lets you evolve without punishing you for it? Who can celebrate your growth without quietly competing with it? Who can hear your success without translating it into their own insecurity? That becomes rare. Incredibly rare. And once you experience that kind of relationship, every performative friendship suddenly feels obvious. By then, the money barely feels like the point anymore. The real transformation was never financial. It was psychological. Because making more money doesn't just upgrade your lifestyle. It changes what you notice, what you tolerate, what exhausts you, what feels normal, who understands you. And eventually, who still fits into your life when the old version of you is gone.